Every American state has a thing. California has coastline, Texas has size, Colorado has mountains, Florida has chaos, Ohio has nothing. Flatland, quiet cities, strip malls that look like every other strip mall in every other suburb in the country. It is the state people forget to list when naming states. The most ordinary patch of ground in America. But here is what that ordinariness is hiding. Ohio quietly decided what you eat, who becomes president, and how products reach your door, because the country that could not figure Ohio out used it as a mirror for itself. For over 50 years, Ohio was America, a perfect reflection of the national average in almost every measurable way, until it suddenly wasn't. And that break tells you more about where the country is headed than anything happening in Washington. To understand how Ohio became the country's mirror, you have to start with a line on the map that almost nobody talks about. A single hidden divide runs across the state, splitting Ohio into two vast drainage basins. It does not announce itself. There is no ridge, no cliff, no visible boundary. It slips through farm fields, small towns, and the outskirts of cities, following gentle rises so subtle you could drive right over them without noticing. But this line decides the fate of every drop of rain that falls on Ohio. North of it, water finds its way to Lake Erie and eventually the Atlantic Ocean. South of it, water flows toward the Ohio River, joins the Mississippi, and empties into the Gulf of Mexico. That simple split turns Ohio into something remarkable, a Continental Hinge, the one place where the two great water highways of America overlap. To the north, Lake Erie offered a direct water route to the Atlantic through the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence Seaway. To the south, the Ohio River connected to the Mississippi and the Gulf of Mexico. Two oceans, reachable from one state. No other place in America sat at the junction of both systems quite like this. And that overlap changed everything. Indigenous nations knew these corridors long before Europeans arrived. Portage trails threaded across the divide, linking the Great Lakes Basin to the Ohio River Valley in a network of routes that followed the lowest crossings and the gentlest terrain. When canals came, they traced the same paths. When railroads came, they did the same. When interstates came, same thing again. Every era of American transportation chose the same corridors through Ohio because the terrain was so flat and so central that building here was always the path of least resistance. The state did not become a crossroads by ambition or clever planning. The geology made it inevitable. But here is the catch. A crossroads without a coast, without mountains, without a single dramatic feature meant that Ohio never developed a sharp identity the way other states did. It absorbed everything that passed through it instead. Northern cities like Cleveland and Toledo looked industrial, shaped by the Great Lakes shipping economy. Southern counties along the river looked Appalachian, with the culture and cadence of Kentucky. Suburbs looked like suburbs anywhere. Ohio became a patchwork of other Americas stitched together inside one set of borders, and that patchwork turned out to be the most politically significant accident in the country. Political analysts have long described Ohio as containing what they call 5 Ohios inside a single state. Industrial lake cities in the north, tied to shipping and manufacturing. Appalachian hill country in the southeast with coal heritage and hollowed-out towns. Flat agricultural plains in the west, where corn and soybean fields stretch to the horizon. A cosmopolitan metro in the center, Columbus, growing fast and pulling in young professionals. And blue-collar river towns along the Ohio River in the south, places where barges still push coal and grain downstream toward the Mississippi. Each one of these regions looks and feels like a slice of a different America. Drive 2 hours in any direction within Ohio, and the landscape, the economy, and the politics shift completely. Cleveland's skyline rises above old steel docks on the lakeshore, a city that once rivaled Pittsburgh for industrial might. 2 hours southeast, you are in the foothills of Appalachia, winding through towns where coal trucks rumble down 2-lane roads and hollows disappear into oak-covered ridges. 2 hours west, the land opens into a table-flat grid of farmland so uniform it looks computer-generated from the air. And along the southern border, river towns like Marietta and Portsmouth sit on bluffs above the Ohio River, places where the accent shifts and the culture tilts toward Kentucky. It is like crossing state lines without ever leaving the state. Because of this patchwork, Ohio's population ended up balanced across urban, suburban, and rural in almost exactly the proportions of the nation as a whole. Its income levels, age distribution, and racial demographics all hovered near the national median. No single region dominated the state's character. No single identity won out. Ohio was not liberal or conservative, not coastal or heartland, not rich or poor. It was all of those things at once, blended into a statewide average that looked almost eerily like the national one. That balance was not just a statistical curiosity, it turned Ohio into the most powerful political instrument in the country. If you want to understand how geography shapes where Americans live, work, and vote, subscribe. From 1964 to 2016, every single winning presidential candidate also won Ohio. 14 straight elections. No other state came close to that streak.
Voting with the Electoral College in 14 consecutive elections. The last time it didn't happen was 1960.
Campaigns did not just visit Ohio, they studied it. They polled its suburbs, canvassed its small towns, and ran focus groups in its mid-sized cities because Ohio's counties reflected the country's divide so precisely that winning Ohio meant you had figured out America. Lose Ohio, and the math almost never worked. The phrase became a political commandment. As Ohio goes, so goes the nation. Every 4 years, Ohio transformed into the most heavily courted piece of real estate in American politics. Television stations in Columbus, Cleveland, and Cincinnati were flooded with so many campaign ads that local viewers could barely watch the evening news without seeing a candidate's face. Field offices opened in strip malls and empty storefronts, staffed by volunteers who knocked on doors in neighborhoods that both parties believed could swing by a few hundred votes. Ohio's major highways, Interstate 70, Interstate 71, Interstate 75, knit together those diverse communities, making it possible for candidates to crisscross the state in a single day, chasing voters who looked and lived much like the national average. Campaign strategists treated it as a chessboard where every piece mattered. A few thousand votes in the right suburban county could tip the entire state and with it, the entire election. But Ohio's mirror power did not stop at elections. Corporations figured out the same trick. Columbus, Ohio's capital and fastest growing city, became known as Test City, USA. Fast food chains tested new menu items there before rolling them out nationally. Retailers trialed store formats and layouts. Wendy's, which was founded in Columbus, used the city as a perpetual laboratory. McDonald's did the same. Dozens of companies treated Columbus as a life-size simulation because if something worked in Columbus, it worked everywhere. The demographics matched. The consumer behavior matched. Even the tastes matched. The McRib was tested in Ohio before anyone else in the country tasted it. Ohio did not just predict who would be president. It predicted what the country would eat, what it would buy, and how it would shop. The most ordinary state in the Union was quietly running America's simulations, not in dramatic fashion, not with skyscrapers or celebrity culture, but in strip mall test kitchens and suburban polling stations where the future was decided one focus group at a time. That was the story of Ohio for half a century. The perfect mirror, the control group, the simulation engine. But something happened in 2020 that broke the pattern, and what it reveals about America is more unsettling than most people realize. In 2020, Donald Trump carried Ohio by about 8 points while losing the national popular vote by roughly 4.5. That is a gap of over 12 points between Ohio and the country it was supposed to reflect. The bellwether was broken. The mirror no longer matched. But this was not a sudden snap. Ohio had been drifting for years, quietly and painfully. Deindustrialization hollowed out manufacturing towns across the northern half of the state. Factories that had employed entire communities for generations shut down or moved overseas. In cities like Youngstown and Dayton, the collapse played out block by block, a shuttered plant, then the diner across the street that served its workers, then the barbershop next door, then the tax base that funded the schools. Young, college-educated residents watched this happen and left for coastal cities where the job markets were stronger and the economies more diverse. The population grew older, whiter, and less representative of the national average with every passing decade. Ohio was not just losing jobs, it was losing the people who might have built something new. The numbers tell the story in human terms. Nearly 1 in 5 Ohioans now lives in an economically distressed zip code, a place where jobs are scarce, poverty is concentrated, and opportunity has largely dried up. Among Black Ohioans, that figure climbs past 50%. Communities that once anchored the middle class found themselves falling behind, not gradually but structurally, locked out of the knowledge economy that was reshaping the rest of the country. The state that once was America started becoming an exaggerated version of just one slice of America. The Rust Belt slice, the left behind slice, the slice that felt forgotten. And the very thing that made Ohio powerful, its averageness, was the first thing to erode. Once the demographics shifted, the mirror warped. Campaigns that once treated Ohio as essential began looking elsewhere, to Arizona, to Georgia, to Nevada. The Sun Belt replaced the Rust Belt as the new battleground. Ohio did not just lose its bellwether status, it lost its relevance in the story America tells about itself. And then something strange happened. As Ohio stopped being America's mirror in politics and economics, it became America's mirror in a completely different way, one that nobody predicted. On TikTok and across internet culture, Ohio became the punchline of a new kind of joke. Eerie edits showing glitchy suburban nightmares, surreal videos set in empty parking lots and featureless landscapes, memes depicting Ohio as a dystopian wasteland where the laws of physics do not apply, where you cannot leave, where the sky looks wrong, where something is always slightly off in a way you cannot quite name. The phrase "only in Ohio" became shorthand for anything absurd, broken, or uncanny. A catch-all for the feeling that something in the American normal had gone sideways. One creator described it as Area 51 weird stuff, and the label stuck. Millions of views, millions of shares, all built on the premise that Ohio is the strangest place in America. But here is the thing nobody says about the Ohio memes. The joke only works because Ohio used to represent normalcy. The humor lives in the gap between what Ohio was supposed to be, the safe, average, unremarkable middle, and what it feels like now. The meme is not random. It is a cultural processing of the same shift the data shows. The place that was once called most American now feels like a place where something went wrong, and that dissonance is exactly what makes the joke land. Gen Z did not pick Ohio by accident. They picked it because it is the state where the American average broke. The flatness, the strip malls, the sameness that once made Ohio the perfect test market, all of that becomes unsettling when the normalcy it represents no longer feels normal. Ohio ended up as America's mirror twice, first in earnest as the bellwether and test market, then in irony as the meme that captures the feeling that ordinary America is not ordinary anymore. But underneath the memes and the broken bellwether, Ohio is still doing what it has always done, connecting things. The same flat terrain and central position that made it a crossroads for canals, railroads, and interstates now makes it a crossroads for logistics and data. The Rickenbacker Inland Port near Columbus handles thousands of rail cars and truckloads every week, linking Midwest factories with global markets. Norfolk Southern and CSX route freight trains through yards in Columbus, Toledo, and Cincinnati, keeping the state at the center of national supply chains. Billions of tons of freight cross Ohio every year by truck, train, and barge, a volume that rivals some coastal harbors. A truck leaving Ohio can reach half the US population within a single day's drive. That geographic advantage has not changed since the first canal boats floated across the watershed divide 200 years ago. The land is doing the same work it has always done, just faster now, and at a scale the canal builders could never have imagined. And now the biggest technology companies on Earth are betting on Ohio's geology all over again. Outside Columbus, Meta has invested $3.5 billion in a data campus sprawling across former farmland, 6 enormous buildings drawing hundreds of megawatts of power. Google, Amazon, and Microsoft followed with billions more. The land that glaciers flattened for agriculture, that settlers crossed on portage trails, that railroads chose because it was easy to build on. That same land now anchors the digital economy. Server racks humming on ground that used to grow soybeans. Fiber optic cables running through corridors that once carried canal boats. Ohio's manufacturing output has climbed above pre-pandemic levels. More factory jobs exist in the state today than before COVID. The state everyone jokes about is quietly becoming the infrastructure backbone of the next American economy. The mirror may be cracked, but the crossroads still works. Stand in Columbus and look around. Chain restaurants testing the nation's next meal. Warehouses moving its packages. Data centers storing its memories. The hum of an economy that touches half the country every single day without anyone noticing. Then open your phone and scroll through Ohio memes, the glitchy suburbs, the uncanny flatness, the jokes about a place where something feels off. 2 Ohio's. One that quietly runs America's systems. Another that America laughs at because it no longer recognizes itself in the mirror. Every other state has a thing. A coastline, a mountain range, a culture that makes it distinct. Ohio's thing was never having a thing. It was the opposite of every state that stands out. And that is exactly what made it the most important state in the country, and exactly what makes its story, right now, the most American story of all. If you want to see how geography drew similar invisible lines through other states, check out one of the recommended videos on screen, and if you have not already, subscribe.